mean when I say feed the soil that feeds the plant that feeds you. That's the way that we have gotten our nutrition for thousands of years. We eat plants that have brought up minerals and enzymes and good bacteria that came into the plant. We ate it and we became healthy. It's not that we go to the GNC and buy things in pill form. We're supposed to get our nutrition from the plants that we eat. But if the plants aren't getting the nutrition, neither are we. So that's the basis of this healthy soil, to feed the plant, to feed you. Okay. We're not advancing. I'm just going to bring mine up. Yep, that's one. Yep.
So it should do it now.
Okay. So the benefits of the healthy soil, not only is it creating healthy plants for us to eat, but we're creating the healthy plants through a deep root system and nutritionally dense plants. So what that means is that we're going to work with the structure of the soil as well as the fertility of the soil. Now, I mentioned before that I have an unusual soil on my farm. I'm located off Sandy Ridge Road, and it's 7 miles from South Carolina. And if you've been to South Carolina, you know their soil profile is sand versus Carolina red clay, which my neighbor 4 acres over has, that mucky red clay. But on my farm, I have a nice sandy loam. So I don't have too much of a problem with a deep root system, whereas my neighbor, or if you have that clay, has to worry about the structure. So we're going to talk about two things: the structure of the soil and the fertility of the soil. But the benefits of a healthy soil should contain those two things. The types of gardens that I'm going to talk about, all, as I said before, they all require a healthy soil to really thrive. Whether it's a flower garden, we want those big, beautiful blooms. Our vegetable gardens to nourish us. Our herb gardens for medicinal and culinary purposes, and native plant gardens so that we can support the diversity of our wildlife and our microorganisms and all the things that come along with things that are native here. They've adapted. Now, one of the things that is that I've been fortunate to do is when I bought my property in 1978, it had been a soybean farm, and they had cleared all the soybeans off and put a house on it. So I had dirt in a house. There was not a blade of grass, a weed, nothing on this 14 acres. And now, when you come and visit us, you're going to see towering oak trees. You're going to see hedgerows. You're going to see, I've been able to live through 48 years of the soil reclaiming what it needs to do. And it's really, we've helped it along, of course, but it's really been fascinating how when you work with nature to build a healthy soil, nature will do a lot of the work for you if you don't get in her way. So we're going to talk about that. Now, when we talk also about soils, when I was originally asked to do the presentation, I was asked to talk about not just working in the earth, but also in raised beds and containers. Because a lot of people now, that's the way they garden, because they might even be in a townhouse, all they have is a patio. They might be limited because of the neighborhood they're in. We even have raised beds. I've got 14 acres, but I've got some raised beds also for some particular types of planting. So when we talk about soils tonight, I'm going to talk about earth soil, but also what you can do in order to create a healthy soil for your raised beds and your pots and containers. So here's the basics. Whether you are in the earth or you're in containers, and raised beds. These are the basics that we want in that soil structure. We want it to hold water, but we also want it to drain freely. Why? Because we need air in that soil also. And then, of course, fertility. But a lot of people don't think about that structure part, that it needs to hold water. But if it doesn't drain away sufficiently, we have no air, it drives out the air, and our plants drown. I have seen more plants and gardens killed by kindness, I'll just water it every day, than killed by neglect. So we're working against ourselves if we're not looking at how porous the soil is. Now again, back to my reference, I have a sandy soil. My soil drains right away. That's a hindrance in the summer when it's not raining. All the folks that have clay soils, that's holding on to soil, or I'm sorry, holding on to water. So that's an advantage to a clay soil. It just depends on the situation and how much water we have. But we're trying to find that balance between holding water and draining. And that, just by it being porous, that's where our air comes in. And we have some materials when we are creating a soil that we can make those two things happen. And then, of course, there's fertility. So we are going to feed the soil. We're not going to, in my organic production system, I'm not going to use a chemical fertilizer, such as the blue juice you're probably all familiar with. That's just feeding the plant. That's not feeding my soil. So when I feed my soil, what does that mean and how am I making it healthy? Well, if I am not putting chemicals on my soil, then I'm allowing the healthy bacteria and fungi to develop, because those are actually what feeds the roots of the plant. It's just like us and our gut biome everybody's talking about now. We eat the fermented foods and the yogurt because once our food gets into our intestines, it's those things that digest it and feed us. So that's where we're built the same as soil, basically. So if we're starting a new in the earth garden, so I've gone out to the backyard, I've decided I don't want to mow it anymore, I want it to grow food, and so I'm starting from scratch. What are the things that I need to do to create that healthy soil? Well, the first thing I want to do is test the pH, because a lot of the absorption of things rests on that pH, and we are so lucky because NC State, at certain times of the year, will test our soil for us for free. When you walk out here, there's a little stand out there. You can pick up a box. It's got all the instructions on it. I think it's $5 fee and, of course, postage in between certain days, and I can never remember what those are, but it'll tell you right on the front. You take your box, you go out, dig some soil. It's got instructions on there. You don't want to contaminate the soil with something that may be on your spade, or I heard a story of one person who took old bread bags and put their soil in it and send it to the lab, and all the crumbs of that bread contaminated. They got some wild results. But if you follow the directions, you'll be fine. And then a little while later, you go online and up pops your report. You no longer have to wait for it to come through the mail like we did in the old days. And it's going to tell you the profile of your soil. Do I need lime? Do I need magnesium? Do I need about 20 other things it's going to tell you? So that's where I'm going to start, because I want to make sure that I'm not putting things on that I don't need. That's going to save me some money. But I want to put on things that I do need in the correct balance. Because if I overdo one thing, now I'm short on something else, because they all work together. So starting with a soil test is the best investment you can get on your garden starting out. Know where you're starting. Now, I test my soils twice a year, and I am required by my certification, my organic certification, to do that, though I would do it anyway. But when they come and they do an audit, They want to see those reports that my soil is getting better and better and better. I have an obligation to do that. And again, when we get to a certain point, that soil is self-sufficient. Over the years, it'll get better and better, and you won't have to buy a bag or a box of something. So take the time now, and it's going to pay off in the long run. We want to aerate the soil. Remember, one of those main things that we're doing is we want to get air in there. Now, you may think of a tractor with a big tiller and a plow behind it and plowing up things to kind of fluff up that soil. We don't do that. We have what's called a broad fork, or you can get a garden fork, and we just lift the soil up. We just kind of put some air into it. If I had a raised bed, I could easily just go out with a trowel and just turn that soil a little bit. I'm not going to be too rough on the soil because I want all of that, that good fungal networks and earthworms. I don't want to chop up all my earthworm buddies in there. I'm going to be gentle with the soil, just knowing all I need to do is put some air in there. I'm going to probably add some organic matter. What is that? Well, that's a compost in our world. When I'm working with containers, there's other ingredients, and I'll get to that in a minute. But that organic matter is the thing that's holding water. It holds a tremendous amount of water. But again, managing that drainage, so I'm not going to drown my plants. And then mulching conserves that water that I've got in there. It's not going to evaporate. It's also going to suppress weeds, which makes my life easier. And then regular fertilization. And that's really all going to depend on what you've got planted in that spot. So that's going to be kind of specific, but we've already started with a soil test. We know what we're trying to build, and we'll go from there. Mm-hmm. If it's resting right on the surface, no, because where that zapping, as you call it, of the soil, if it's down underneath, that bacteria is going to go and try to break it down underneath. So yes, it's drawing it in, and they're going to work on that rather than working on feeding the plant. But if it's on top, yeah. Yes, ma'am. No. Okay. Okay. Yes. So the question was, mulching on top, is it depleting the soil? No, but if you were to incorporate those chips into the soil, then that bacteria that's feeding the plant is going to munch on that wood chips. So here's what we do at Windcrest. Like I said, we do a soil test, we aerate, and then we add compost and minerals. And I'll get into more of that detail as we go along. So what do we do with raised beds and containers? So we wanted to put together the correct mix, the right mix. And when I say mix, there's different things that we're mixing up, right? We're probably mixing plants. So if I have a raised bed, I don't want to plant things that require a lot of water next to things that don't require water at all, okay? I spent a lot of time getting that holding water and drainage thing all situated out, and then I'm putting two plants that are not compatible. That's not gonna work well with you. What would be an example? If I had an herb bed, I wouldn't put lavender and rosemary and oregano, which are all my Mediterranean perennials, with my parsley and my basil, which like a lot of water, right? So my Mediterraneans like it dry, my annuals like a little more moisture. If you've grown basil and you've seen it on a hot day when it didn't have enough water, it's kind of sad. Whereas the Mediterraneans are loving it. So when we're working in raised beds or doing our companion planting, look at the water requirements of the plants. the watering needs, and then the fertility. So again, if I'm using the example of herbs, they don't require as much fertilization as, say, a tomato or a squash or something like that. When we kind of starve our herbs a little bit, it really makes them a little more flavorful. But so we're not just talking about the right mix of soil, we're talking about the right mix of what's going in the soil. So here's some of the ingredients if we're working with a raised bed or in pots. And some of these ingredients, if you are trying to work with an earth bed and you're trying to add some texture to it or to add some water holding capabilities to it, here's some of the materials that we can buy, the bulk materials that we can buy. So peat moss or cocoa coir. Cocoa coir is replacing peat moss in a lot of applications because it's a more sustainable product. And that is basically the husk off of coconuts that has been ground down. The advantage of cocoa coir is it's a neutral pH, whereas if we use a peat moss, we're definitely going to have to invest in some lime because it is very acidic. Peat moss at first is very hydrophobic, so it does not absorb water at all. It'll run right off of it until you break that water tension, and then it's a sponge. But don't let it dry out because then it's hydrophobic again. It's repelling water. Whereas cocoa coir, it does not do that. The other thing that now that you're seeing more and more on the market in bags and in bag mixes is wood fiber products. So when I started 20 years ago, there was a lot of research going on about what they could replace peat moss with as a substrate. And the wood fiber products have come a long way. So if you see that on a bag or you see that as a bulk item, that's very widely used. It may not be familiar to you, but it's the market for that has really matured. You may have seen in potting mixes perlite. Looks like little bits of styrofoam. Makes me crazy. It is a natural product, but instead of perlite, we use a certified organic rice hull. And what is that for? Whereas the two at the top are for water holding. The ones that I'm talking about here, the perlite, rice hulls, and sand, are for that drainage. So we're trying to get a balance. So I may be going out to, I want to put in a blueberry orchard. I have a heavy clay. I might want to kind of aerate that a little bit. I might use a peat moss because it's acidic and my blueberry bushes love that. And then I might throw in some sand or some rice hulls in order to give it some drainage, changing the texture. The other thing that you'll see in, well, let me talk about the rice hulls for a minute. That was a product that came out about 15 or 16 years ago. It is a certified organic hull off the rice. It serves the same purpose as a perlite. The thing about it is that it does break down, so we have to refresh it. But when it is breaking down, it's decomposing, it's actually adding fertility to my soil in the form of silica. And silica builds strong cell walls. Our nails are silica, our hair is silica. So I like that in organic production as something to aerate. And then there is sand, again, depending on what you're growing. If you're into succulents, you'll see a lot of mixes that have a lot of sand in it because it's very quick draining. Vermiculite is a rock product. It looks very silvery, and the bonus for that is it not only holds water, but drains water. It holds it in itself, but it provides that airspace. And when you go down the vermiculite road, it comes in very, very fine, I mean, almost like a powder, all the way up to chunks. And it's used a lot in raised beds for both drainage and holding water. So now we've got the basis, and now we're going to look at some fertility. What are we going to add? So compost, we all need to recycle our plant matter, our kitchen waste, make compost, but some of us need to buy it in a bag. And there's many options out there, one of which, mushroom, is very commonly used. And when you open it, it's going to look like that wood product because that's what they grow mushrooms on. Here's what I'll tell you about mushroom compost. It is very alkaline. And the first year that gardeners use it, particularly in our native acid soils, you get fabulous results. I mean, you're like, wow, I can't believe I bought this and I got this great results. And so the next year you go out and buy it again. But you've already balanced your soil, the acidic soil, with the alkaline mushroom. You didn't do your soil test. You put that mushroom compost again. Now you're way alkaline and you're out of range. So that right there, you can get fabulous results one season. But if you're not doing these things on a consistent basis, you can get out of balance the next season. All you got to do is get the little box and put the dirt in it and take it to the post office. So what do we use at Windcrest? So I have, we use mineral-based fertilizers and biologicals. So I have a product called Mary's Mineral Mix. I started putting this together 20 years ago, and it's what we've run on for 20 years. And what's in it is a high calcium lime. So if I'm putting it into my potting soils, I am balancing out the acidity of that peat moss. Azomite, which is a volcanic ash, it's got 72 different minerals in it. Rock phosphate, magnesium sulfate, Epsom salts. All of us now, what are they telling us? You're low on vitamin D because we're not getting outside enough, and you got to have magnesium so you can sleep at night, right? It's because it's not in our soils anymore, the magnesium, but we add it back in. Wallace Stonite is a silica-based mined mineral. And then we use 2 plant-based fertilizers, and all of these are certified organic. Alfalfa meal is a fabulous balanced fertilizer. It's like a 5-4-3, and it's all natural. It's feeding the biology as well as the plants. Rose growers have known this for decades. You talk to like a tried and true rose grower. That's what they've been using for a long time. And kelp meal. Now you'll notice that there's no animal products in that. And I'll talk about that as we get to the next slide. And biologicals, right? Biochar, which is not a biological, but it's basically a charcoal. And what it is it's sequestering carbon, but it's giving nooks and crannies for our good bacteria to get in and reproduce and create a healthy soil. And then the mycorrhizal fungi is that network that is communicating all kinds of enzymes and nutrients between the plant roots. Containers and raised beds. Okay, so yes. Okay. I'll answer that now. I think that everything should be mulched to conserve water and for suppressing weeds. And when you use a natural product, it's breaking down and you're slowly but surely doing some composting right there. The thing with hay, though, is you can get a hold of hay that's been sprayed with herbicide. And we encountered this in the first year of Windcrest Farm. I had planted 120 tomato plants. And I have horses. I had more of them then, but I still have one. And a friend of mine who had Arabs, and if you know anything about horses, that her horse would not eat all of the hay that she had just brought in. It was very picky. And she said, do you want this hay? And I said, yeah, that'd be great, because we were going to mulch these 120 tomato plants. So we went out and spent an afternoon and put it down, and then it rained. And I went out, and all of those tomato plants looked like they had been hit by a blowtorch, because the herbicide that was on that hay, no wonder her horse wouldn't eat it, rinsed off, and tomato plants are very sensitive to herbicide carryover. And we spent the next day getting every single bit of that off the land into trash bags and out to a dump. And that was the last time that I used hay that I didn't know who grew it. So just be very careful. And NC State does have a bulletin. You can Google NC State herbicide carryover, and they go through the whole thing. So I believe in mulch. You just got to know the source. Yes, we use cardboard quite a bit. It is approved for our organics. You can't use anything that's shiny. So if it's craft paper, and even if it has writing on it, a majority of things now are soy-based ink. You have to make that decision as to whether that's something that you want to incorporate. Take off all the tape and the little packing slip packets, and that can be quite a chore. Trust me, I know, because I've done a lot of it. We tend not to put it around edibles, but I use it in paths all the time. I don't have it right up against my plants. That's just me personally, but I am allowed to use it with our organic certification. Yeah. So the question is, can I use pellets or alfalfa cubes? You can. It's a more expensive way to go. I buy it in 50-pound bags, and it is certified organic. So I've not bought the pellets, so I don't know if they are organic or not. But I think it's a little more economical that it has not gone through the process of them squishing it into pellets and cubes. But yes, you can. And I know people who do it because they feel it's more convenient. Yes. The vendor for rice hulls is me. You can, Seven Springs up in Floyd, Virginia, that does make a run, I think at least once a month here to the Ag Center. She's a dealer also. She makes regular runs. You can go as Country Home in Pittsburgh, and you can get it from them and delivered here to the Ag Center. I do about 3 orders a year. I'm not big. When we get ready to do an order, which we will in the next 2 weeks, then I just kind of send out a newsletter. So there's a plug, get on my newsletter, and then you see what you need, and we have it all pulled in, and then come to the farm and pick it up. Now, I will tell you that it comes in these huge compressed bales, and there's a lot of it. So if you have a small space, you may want to consider splitting a bag with someone, because if you store it, cats and mice and possum love to make beds out of it. So get what you need and share the rest. Just something to think about. So February 22nd is when we open. So let's say we're going to a garden center or to a big box store, and as I was doing some refresh to do this presentation, I did just that, and I was pleasantly surprised at the number of options that are now available that were not available before. But there's a lot of them, and knowing the vocabulary of what's on the bag will help you make choices. So you'll see some things called potting soil versus potting mix. Potting soil will have some soil in it, whereas potting mix is going to be soilless. So it's the peat, the cocoa coir, the vermiculite, the rice hulls, but the soil does have some soil in that. Now, it's probably a little less expensive. I would use that for a raised bed, but I wouldn't be starting my seedlings in it because the potting mix is going to be sterile, whereas the potting soil may have something that's not necessarily harmful to a plant, but little baby seedlings are a little more susceptible. So make sure you're looking for, if you're starting your own seeds, that it says potting mix rather than potting soil. Garden soil, it's got, again, soil in it, and they probably added some amendments in there, some fertility things. It's just like we're encouraged to do when we go to the grocery store, read the label, see what's in it. Think, what am I going to do with this? What's the purpose of what is in this bag? Am I aerating? Am I fertilizing? Am I just amending? Am I just filling a pot and, to just put something in it? So look at that. And topsoil to me is not soil, it's dirt, right? It's an unknown fertility, drainage, aerating. So when I talk about soil, it's living, it's fertile. Topsoil is dirt. So now, if I'm going to buy a bag soil, and a lot of greenhouses, organic greenhouses do, we make our own blend, because when we started 20 years ago, there wasn't the options that there are now. And so I have the equipment to make soil just for the farm. But if I'm buying something, what I'm looking for, first of all, is the OMRI, some people say OMRI, listed products for organic use. OMRI stands for Organic Materials Review Institute. Any product that I use that has that symbol, and think of it as the Good Housekeeping seal of approval for organic gardening. It's an independent testing lab that goes through and it says, yep, that material is okay. Yep, that one's okay. No, that's not. You got to change it or you're not organic. So the first thing that I would look for is that OMRI listed. And again, I was surprised at how many there are now. This was a bag that I saw. I grabbed that from Lowe's website. You can kind of see who the manufacturer is. And there's a little piece over there. I tried to get the whole thing out of it, but I didn't. And that's a judgment call too of what companies you want to support. Are they rooted in organics, or they're just riding the train? But if they've got the OMRI listed, it's approved for organics. So what might be in that bag? Okay, so peat moss, sometimes it's called sphagnum moss, depending on where in the world it's coming from, cocoa coir, and wood byproducts. So that's our base. That's what's going to hold the water. Then we've got vermiculite, perlite, rice hulls, and sand. Again, that's what's giving us some air and some drainage. They may list the products that they are using for fertility. We've talked about those already. The earthworm castings, compost, biochar, and mycorrhizal fungi. If you see anything that says wetting agents, chemical fertilizers, something that's patented, or any other additives, that's where you need to start questioning it. And usually if you see those, you're not going to see the OMRI certificate. And then the other fertility that we've talked about, alfalfa meal, kelp meal, and the rock minerals. Now what you'll see in a lot of them, and these were included in this organic, OMRI listed raised bed soil, was bone meal, fish meal, and blood meal. Now these are animal byproducts, and they're great for fertility. We don't use them because some of our customers are vegan, but we do very well with staying plant-based. But the other thing is if you have a dog or a cat like I do, and you put that fertilizer out there, they're going to go, woohoo, there's fish in the garden, or something's bleeding, maybe I can eat it, and they do, and then they come in the house and create a mess. So again, reading the labels, this may not make any difference to you. And they are excellent fertilizers. But for those two reasons, we don't include those. But they can be listed on an OMRI listed product. Now, a lot of questions that I get is, can I reuse the soil that's in my raised bed in my container? Or do I have to dig it out and put new stuff in? No, you don't. You can refresh it. There's no reason, unless you have gotten a specific soil-borne disease that you've identified, and it wasn't something died because of neglect or insect on the top. It is a fungal disease, something, give you an example, nematodes. You pull that plant out and along the roots there was all these little nodules and stuff. That could happen, but it's not, it's not likely. You can go through the same things that we talked about before and refresh those beds and pots. No need to throw that soil out. Test it, add organic matter, aerate it, make sure that it's draining well. Okay, so sometimes what will happen with our containerized soils, and even on the earth soil, but a lot of times with the containerized soil, is it will compact. When I'm using rice hulls, remember I said they decompose, and when they do, that airspace goes away and they can compact. So I may need to still manage the drainage, particularly as the longer that sits in a raised bed. Dig down in there, like you're starting from scratch. We've talked about mulching and then regular fertilization. And the healthier that soil gets, the more you pay attention to that, the less that you'll have to buy something in a bag to keep it going. And then there's always, we could talk about crop rotation to build fertility and cover crops to build fertility and lots of other things, but I'm giving you just the basics of the soil tonight. Yes. Well, it depends on the size of the container. All right, so if you've got, let's say, 4x8 raised beds, whatever you grew in that bed is going to draw out a certain subset of minerals and exude a certain set back in. So now all of a sudden we're talking about crop rotation, right? So if you have a heavy feeding crop, you would want to rotate that with something different that might put things back into the soil. You live in Union County, you see it every season. That field is corn one season, and the next season it's soybeans. Why? Corn is a heavy feeder. The next year they do a soybean, which is fixing nitrogen in the soil, and then they come back, and maybe in the winter they do a rye crop that's breaking up the subsoil. So you can use plants to build a healthy soil. So back to the question, should you do each container? Well, if I've got a good rotation going on, and I know that I'm using nature to help build that, I still, again, it'd be case specific. You could do all of them and do just a broad, I think this is just going to be a good broad thing. Or if you've got some specialty things in each one of those places, it doesn't cost anything to do a soil test. It just takes your time to go out and put soil in a box and take it to the post office. So it depends on how fine you want to do it. So I have 3 high tunnels, which looks like a greenhouse, but we're growing in the ground. And then we have field plots. And I think I take anywhere from 10 to 12 samples twice a year. So I'll take it particularly in the fall, because now that's when my soil is going to be the most depleted, right? I've just grown all my summer crops. So I want to know what I need to do. And I like to do my fertilization in the fall, so I don't have to do it in the spring with the other 1,000 things that I need to do. But I might do it again in the spring to say, okay, that lime has had time to work. All of those things that I have put in have been absorbed in the soil. Let me see if I made a difference or if I maybe need to boost a little bit. Now, I'm doing this commercially, so I'm probably doing a lot more than a home gardener needs to do. But, twice a year, you'll see trends, and you can see what you're doing. Is it working or not? And in the long run, you'll save money. Yes. Yeah, I'm in the soil. Yeah. Yeah. All right, and we've talked a little bit about this just in this last little bit. The seasonal garden tasks that you can do to just keep your soil healthy, spring planting and fertilization, that's what we're coming up into now. But in the fall, growing a cover crop and mulching will save you so much work in the spring, because when we just abandon our growing beds at the end of the fall, and it's easy to do because by the time you get to the fall, it's already been 100 degrees for how long, and you're tired and you're done, and we just say, see you until spring. But if you take just a little bit, clean up those beds, mulch it, or even take a handful of red clover, crimson clover, fabulous fertilizer. That'll green up those beds in the spring. All of a sudden, you've got these beautiful red blossoms. The bees adore it. It suppressed all the weeds. And now you don't have to dig out all of that stuff. You can mow that stuff down and plant right into it, and you're ready to go. So these are things that we can help have a healthy garden soil that don't involve, a bag or a box. Okay. That was a lot of information. Any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
Now, we move in, we want to plant shrubs and flowers. What can we do? We can't fill it up. Other than raise beds, we want to plant in the ground. What can we do in that soil to prepare it for perennials and shrubs?
One of the ways that you can do it, and it's a long-term solution. It's not, we're going to spend a nice weekend and get it ready and then plant it in. Other than, hiring somebody to just get in there and dig it. One of the long range ways you can do it is take that cardboard that we talked about before and put it down and wet it really well and gather out all the leaves from the neighbors or get some mulching material, maybe it's wood chips, and put it on top of that and keep it well watered. And you would be surprised at the earthworms and the way that soil will start to soften back up. You can even add fertilizer, just a little bit, and it will encourage the biology, a natural fertilizer, not like a 10-10-10, but it will encourage that biology. Maybe put some, compost down, do your soil test. Maybe mushroom compost is the perfect thing for getting that soil turned around to the right pH and having some biology in it and softening it up. It's going to take a season. No, it's probably going to take an entire year for that to really, for you to be able to go out and just put a spade in it and and turn it over. Yeah, it's a long term. Yes, I mean, I couldn't physically do it. When I moved on to like I said, onto my farm, there was not a blade of grass or a tree on it. I have towering oaks now. And what we did was we got some wood chips, and it was it was bad, but Hurricane Hugo gave us a lot of wood chips, and we would pile them this high. I mean, this high. And by the next year, they were this high. And that soil under there, you could just pull it apart, and the earthworms, it was like, oh, earthworm buffet. They just came out of nowhere and softened that up. But you'd be surprised if you do it deep. Don't do just a little bit, because then you get weeds. But I mean, really do it deep, and you'll be stunned at how it decomposes. You're composting in place. Yeah. Okay, gypsum is a source of calcium that does not change the pH. If you don't need it, again, test your soil. There's no point putting any form of calcium on there if you don't need it. Not that I know of, but I'm not an expert in loosening soils because I'm on a sandy soil. Yeah. In the back there? The answer to that is, let me repeat the question. She has wood chips in her chicken coop, which now have chicken manure with the wood chips, and it looks great. And yes, it will. Chicken manure is a hot manure. So it's going to work on those wood chips very quickly. And you're going to get that composty that looks good. The thing is have you waited long enough for that chicken manure not to be hot? And when I say hot, I mean, it's the temperature, and it'll burn roots. With the organic certification, the rules we have to follow is that if we're saying we're using compost, which is what that looks like in your coop, right? If we're using the term compost, there is a very specific set of rules that say that pile of whatever that is has to be turned a certain number of times within a certain number of days, and the temperature raised in order to kill any pathogens. And we can't put it on any crop until that is done, except that there's a rule called a 120-day rule. And what that means is I can take raw chicken manure. I can take everything out of your chicken coop that probably looks really good, and I can put it on anything, but I can't harvest from that for 120 days because they feel like at that point, the risk of pathogens is gone. So that's where I would use what you have, put it down in the fall, put that crimson clover and winter rye, a cover crop on it, grow a fabulous cover crop, mow that down, and now you are good to go. You've got a really good organic fertility program going. Yes. So she was saying that she's adding the chicken manure that had the wood into a regular compost pile that has got your kitchen scraps and wood ash and all of that. Be very careful with your wood ash. You can overdo that. And if you're wood burning, just a little bit goes a long way is what I'm saying. Just be careful about that in your compost pile. But yes, you can use that. Yes.
So about breaking up the
Mm-hmm.
that's something that looks like a long-term you'll amend to the soil so that would work.
Absolutely. We have comfrey all over the farm. It is a fabulous, fabulous plant. Everybody should have comfrey. It does spread, but medicinally, the taproot, it's an early flower for the bees. Anything that has a long taproot. For instance, farmers will plant a fall crop of daikon radish. You know, a daikon radish is really deep. And they call it a tillage, the specific variety is called a tillage radish. So they wait till it breaks up the soil and then they cut it off. Folks that are battling dandelions in their lawn. The reason you have dandelions in your lawn is it is a plant indicator that your soils are low in calcium. Because what that dandelion, and if you've ever tried to dig them out, right, it's got that long root, that taproot is going down, is trying to scavenge calcium deep in the soil. It brings it up to the leaves, and then when those leaves die, it's delivering calcium to the surface. That's the way Mother Nature works. And if you think about dandelion greens, they're so healthy for us. Why? Because they got calcium in them. You know, dandelion wine, dandelion root coffee. Dandelions are great. So I want to get rid of all the dandelions in my lawn. I'll just go get a soil test. How much lime do I need? Put calcium all over the lawn, and those dandelions will do their job and go away without having to use chemical fertilizers. Yes. Aggressive. There is a variety called Russian Blocking 14, and it does not spread. What we have at the farm is the traditional comfrey. We don't care if it spreads. We use it as fertilizer. A lot of orchardists will plant comfrey in their orchard, and then they do what's called chop and drop fertilization. So they'll go through the orchard and mow it to the ground, let it come back up, mow it to the ground, and when that, because comfrey is very high in protein and nitrogen and again calcium, and so they're just composting those leaves in place. In order to keep the, oh, and in the orchard too, it's one of the first things that blooms. So we're bringing in the pollinators and the beneficials to pollinate the fruit trees. So it's a fabulous plant. And the leaves get quite big and will shade out weeds in the orchard. So, but in a small real estate, it will spread and it will get big. And so if you really love it for the leaves, we have cattle folks that come to the farm and gather it because if you've got a cow with mastitis, you make a poultice and it will relieve the mastitis. And people with plantar fasciitis will make a poultice out of those fresh leaves and put them on the bottom of their foot. So it's a fabulous plant, but it will spread. Yes, ma'am. We have applied it directly to the garden, again, very sparingly, and again, after a soil test. So when you're using it, you're not dumping handfuls of the wood ash in the garden. It's more like you're salting a cake or salting a dish, salting a cake, sugaring a cake. Hmm? It makes everything go out of balance. Yeah. Yeah, it's very potent. It's great because a little goes a long way, but you just have to know that a little goes a long way. I had a customer whose dad thought if a little was good, a lot was better, and wiped out her garden. They had a wood stove. They had a lot of them, and he didn't know what to do with it. So, but that's just a word of caution. It's great. A little bit. Yeah.
The animal manure. You talked about the chicken manure, but any other manure to use, or you avoid it because of
The question is about using manures. We don't use manures, even though I have a horse. I've had lots of horses, and we had manure available, to us. It's just a lot more work than I want to go to, particularly when I can use a rock mineral and the kelp meal and the alfalfa meal, which gives me what I want with convenience and without the odor and the mess. We have, like I said before, we have put down manure. If we had some extra, planted a cover crop on top of it, waited that 120 days, that's 3 months, and then we can plant right into it. Do your homework on manures. Like I said, chicken manure is very hot, so it's going to take a different processing. I've never put a fresh chicken manure on anything because it would burn the roots of a plant. A cow manure, that cow has digested that plant material through 3 stomachs. By the time it gets out the other end, it's cold and it's very nutrient, and it has a less weed seed pressure than the horse manure. If you had horses, they're eating on one end and they're immediately pooping it out on the other end. I mean, it comes through. So you get more of a weedy manure with a horse. Pig, goat, rabbit manure is apparently fantastic. It's a cold manure and very high nutrient. So I'm not against manures. It's just for our workflow and for what we have to adhere to for our organic certification, it doesn't work into my process. Yes. Leaves are fantastic, and we've used a lot of them over the years, particularly on pathways, because as they break down, which they naturally do, you're composting in place. If you leave the leaves whole, it takes longer for them to break down. But if you run the lawnmower over them a couple of times, not only do they tend to stay in place, but they break down faster. And you get a fresh supply every year. It's not like you have, if you've got trees around you, you have neighbors that are conveniently bagging them up for you in plastic bags, and you can put them right where you want them. My sister, she goes around the neighborhood and she gathers those bags and she puts them in the corner of her yard. So now she's killing any weeds that are there, and she lets them just cook in those bags. And by the time she opens them up, you have what's called leaf mold. And some people even add that to their potting soils. You can mix it into your raised beds. Leaves are fantastic. Anything else? All right.
I want to go around.
Yeah.
But, one time I brought home a whole gang of magnolia leaves, and they blow and they take forever to break down. You can also bring in wheat seeds, baby, drink bottles, all kinds of stuff that gets picked up in those bags.
My website is up here. I invite you all to visit windcrestorganics.com. I do a weekly newsletter that's got a lot of educational things in it, as well as calls to support our farm by buying plants and fertilizer, shopping. Yes. We'll have all of our spring things out February the 22nd. And when I say spring, I'm talking about 5 different varieties of kales, 10 different varieties of lettuces, Brussels sprouts, collards, cauliflower, all of those things that now that we have the spring fever because it's been so warm, that we can put in the ground and not have a heart attack when winter comes back, because it is going to. And then when we get to the end of March, 1st of April, then we have 25 varieties of tomatoes, 45 different varieties of tomatoes, 25 different varieties of peppers. We grow onions, ginger, and turmeric. We can set you up. We're here to support you as a gardener. We do some produce also. We did a lot of that when we were at the farmer's market. We're ramping that back up because we feel that that's important right now. But we're there to help you get your garden started. So visit us. Yeah. Yes. Yes. There is a catalog, and if you will go to my website and get my email address and say, I'm the gentleman who asked about the catalog, and anybody can do that, I'll send you a link to the catalog of all of the supplies. Yeah, it's quite extensive.
Any other questions? Hasn't she been great?
Thank you.
Next month, we have Jason Losey. He's a local